Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really opening up some foundational texts.
We are.
4 key chapters from Genesis 17, 18, 19, and 20.
Yeah, these are huge. They're not just old stories. They really get to the heart of covenant identity.
Absolutely. What it means to be God's people.
And they juggle these massive themes, don't they? Divine promise, divine justice.
And, maybe surprisingly, human weakness. Real persistent failure.
Definitely.
So our mission in this deep dive, what we want to do is really pull out the core insights, how that identity gets established, how justice and mercy work together or sometimes seem like they don't, in these intense stories.
Right.
And like you said, the role human weakness plays, which is kind of central in a strange way.
It really is.
We're starting with Genesis 17. That's where we see this immediate, total identity shift.
It's a massive moment of a formal covenant renewal. And the most obvious sign, the name changes.
Right. Abram becomes Abraham.
Yeah, Abram means something like exalted father, but Abraham, that's father of a multitude, father of many nations. It's not just a new name, it's a completely new destiny handed to him.
A destiny tied to nations, plural.
Exactly. A future he probably couldn't even imagine at that point.
And it's not just him. Sarai, his wife, she's central too.
Absolutely crucial. Sarai, maybe meaning my princess, is elevated to Sarah. Just princess.
Which sounds like maybe a downgrade. But it's not.
No, the text makes it really clear. This isn't about his princess anymore. She's a princess in her own right, the mother through whom these nations will come. The promise flows directly through her.
So the covenant involves both of them equally in that sense.
Very much so. And tied to this promise, this new identity, is a physical sign, circumcision.
Now, this wasn't, invented here, was it, historically speaking?
No, not at all. We know it was practiced in the ancient Near East, Egypt, some other Semitic groups. They did it. So the physical act itself, not unique.
Okay, so if the act was already around, why pick that? What makes the Genesis 17 use of it so different, so important?
Well, the writers take this existing practice and they completely reframe it. They strip away any, general cultural meaning it might have had.
And give it a purely theological one.
Precisely. It becomes the sign of the covenant, a perpetual physical mark. It sets Abraham's descendants apart, marking them as belonging to this specific promise from God.
But the location? Why the focus on the means of generation?
That's a great question. And scholars have suggested a few things. One strong idea is that marking the very source of human lineage, the ability to have children, it served as this constant physical reminder, a sign of dependence.
Dependence. How so?
That even this fundamental human power creating the next generation ultimately relies on God's promise, not just human biology or effort. It physically binds them to the covenant in a way that's, fundamentally different from, say, a business contract.
So it's about identity through God's choice, not human achievement.
Exactly. It's written onto the body.
That's a powerful idea. And, okay, no sooner is this identity set up, this sign given, than we plunge into Genesis 18. The whole cone shifts, doesn't it?
Completely. Chapter 17 is quite formal, ritualistic. Chapter 18, it's suddenly very dramatic, very personal, dialogue heavy.
We get that famous scene, Abraham's hospitality at Mamre.
Right, under the trees. He sees 3 visitors, rushes to welcome them. Hospitality was, a sacred duty.
And the way it's written, it feels like more than just human visitors.
It really does. Tradition often reads this as a theophany God appearing in some tangible way. Some Christian interpretations even see it as a hint of the Trinity. The writing is just incredibly intimate.
And the message they bring, it immediately circles back to that covenant promise, but makes it intensely personal for Sarah.
Yes. Despite her age, Sarah, your wife, will have a son, Isaac.
And that's where we see the tension laid bare, right? Sarah's inside the tent. She overhears an understandable reaction.
Totally understandable. It highlights that deep human struggle, doesn't it, between doubt and faith. She's just being realistic from a human perspective.
But God's response cuts right through that.
It does. That question, is anything too hard for the Lord? That line basically sums up the whole theology of the promise. God's power transcends our limitations, our doubts.
Okay, so we have the promise reaffirmed, but then the story takes another turn towards justice.
Right. God decides to share the plan about Sodom with Abraham. Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do?
That feels incredibly significant. It's not just God dictating terms.
No, it's like God is inviting him into the decision-making process, almost. Establishing Abraham not just as a recipient of promises, but as a partner, someone God discusses justice with.
And Abraham, Wow, he really takes that opening.
He leans right in, steps up as an intercessor. He starts bargaining for Sodom.
Boldly. What if there are 50 righteous? Then 45, 40, all the way down to 10.
It's an amazing scene. It shows God's justice isn't arbitrary and that God values mercy enough to engage in this negotiation. It sets a precedent, really.
The responsibility for the covenant people to argue for justice.
I think so, to intercede, to care about the fate of others.
But ultimately, his intercession doesn't save the cities, which leads us straight into the disaster of Genesis 19.
Yeah, and the question that's always debated, what exactly was the sin of Sodom?
Popular tradition obviously focuses on sexual sin.
Mm-hmm.
And the immediate crisis in chapter 19 involves that threat, right? The mob wanting to assault the visitors.
Absolutely. That rejection of hospitality, the desire for violent sexual acts against guests, that's the trigger point in the narrative. It shows a complete breakdown of social and moral order. Refusing to protect the vulnerable guest was like the ultimate taboo.
So the violence, the intended assault, it's presented as the culmination of their wickedness.
It is. But it's worth looking at how other parts of the Bible interpret Sodom's sin, too, like the prophet Ezekiel, for instance, chapter 16, verse 49. It gives a broader picture. It says Sodom's sin was pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy.
Ah, okay. So it's not just the sexual aspect, though. That's clearly part of the Genesis narrative's focus. It's also arrogance, complacency,
indifference to suffering, neglect of justice.
So the violent outburst in Genesis 19 is maybe a symptom of this deeper systemic corruption rooted in pride and injustice.
That's a very common understanding, yes. The whole society was rotten from the core, starting with arrogance and ending in violence and the rejection of fundamental moral duties.
And Lot. He's presented as the only righteous one there, but he's such a complicated figure.
Deeply ambiguous. His initial hospitality is commendable, a stark contrast. But then his actions later, trying to protect the guests.
Offering his daughters instead. It's horrifying.
It is. And the aftermath is just tragic all around.
Total destruction. Fire and brimstone. It has that feel of final, almost mythological judgment, like the flood stories.
Very much so. And the personal tragedies continue even after the escape.
Lot's wife, looking back, turned to salt. A stark image.
A warning, perhaps, about attachment to the past or maybe disobedience in that crucial moment. And then the story takes an even darker turn with Lot's daughters.
It's incredibly disturbing. Their isolation, their fear.
Their belief that they're the last people on Earth, essentially, and their decision to ensure the family line continues through incest with their father.
It's a really bleak ending to that whole episode. The narrative doesn't shy away from the devastating consequences.
No, it shows how chaos and moral collapse breed desperation and further tragedy. And of course, the text uses this disturbing origin to explain the beginnings of Moab and Ammon, peoples who often had difficult relationships with Israel. The implication is that their origins are rooted in this moment of desperation and sin.
The weight of unrighteousness echoing down generations.
Exactly.
Okay, let's shift gears to Genesis 20. Because just when you think you've seen the height of drama and moral complexity,
Abraham messes up again.
Big time. He repeats the exact same mistake as he did way back in Genesis 12.
The she's my sister routine, this time with Abimelech, king of Gerar.
The timing is just incredible. He's just established this massive covenant identity, argued with God over justice, seen divine judgment.
You think he learned, he just displayed incredible moral courage negotiating for Sodom.
Right. But confronted with fear, personal risk in a foreign land, he defaults back to deception. Why? Why include this repetition? It seems almost embarrassing for the founding father figure.
I think that's precisely the point. It's meant to be jarring. It highlights this stark contrast, Abraham's status as covenant bearer versus his actual human fallibility.
His fear overrides his faith in that moment.
Completely. He endangers the promise, endangers Sarah, all out of fear. But notice what happens immediately.
God steps in.
Directly.
Yes, but differently this time. Not the face-to-face chat like Date Moraine. God warns Abimelech, the foreign king, in a dream.
Bypassing Abraham altogether.
Effectively, yes. God acts to protect Sarah, to protect the covenant line, despite Abraham's failure. Abimelech is prevented from touching Sarah. So the takeaway isn't Abraham's perfect. Far from it.
Exactly. The core theological point here, emphasized by the repetition, is that the security of God's promise doesn't depend on the faithfulness or the perfection of the human involved, even the patriarch.
It depends solely on God's faithfulness.
Entirely. God will safeguard his plan even when the chosen instruments are flawed, fearful, and frankly, make the same stupid mistakes twice.
You can see how important that message would be for the original audience, the Israelites.
Oh, absolutely. Reading this, they'd see their own struggles, their own repeated failures reflected in their founder. And the message is, God's promise to you isn't nullified by your weaknesses either. It's bigger than human failing.
It really puts the focus back on God as the reliable actor in the covenant.
It does.
Thinking about these 4 chapters together, 17, 18, 19, 20, the styles are so different, aren't they?
Very different. You move from that almost legal ritual language in 17
Yeah, the covenant details, circumcision.
to the incredibly vivid anthropomorphic storytelling in 18 and 19. God walking, talking, eating, negotiating.
Intense dialogue, real human emotion, doubt, fear.
Then chapter 19's judgment narrative, which is dramatic and harsh. And then 20 shifts again, with the divine communication happening through a dream to a non-Israelite.
It feels like layers of tradition woven together.
That's exactly what most scholars think. That these texts were likely compiled over time, maybe during the monarchy, or even later, after the exile. And they bring together different strands of tradition.
Can you give an example of those strands, like different voices?
Sure. You can sort of sense what scholars call the priestly voice, or P, in chapter 17. Very concerned with ritual, covenant signs, lineage, order.
Okay.
Then chapters 18 and 19 feel much more like the J source, the Yahwist. Great storytelling, very human-like portrayal of God, lots of dialogue, focus on promise and moral consequences.
And chapter 20, with the dream.
That often gets associated with a E source, the Elohist. Dreams are a common way God communicates in those traditions, often involving prophets or non-Israelites receiving divine messages. More indirect interaction, perhaps.
So by weaving these different traditions, these different voices together,
the final editors created something richer, more complex than any single source alone. You get multiple facets of God's character and the covenant relationship.
what do you think their combined goal was? The writers or compilers?
Well, several things, probably. Theologically, they wanted to hammer home that this covenant identity is everything, and that God is both just demanding righteousness and incredibly merciful and faithful.
Okay, theological aim. What about morally?
Morally, I think they're encouraging specific virtues. Radical hospitality like Abraham's, faith even against the odds like the promise to Sarah, and that courage to intercede, to argue for justice, and warnings too, right? Against pride, complacency, ignoring the needy, the sins linked to Sodom.
And overarching all of that, the narrative itself.
The big narrative point seems to be God's plan will succeed, full stop. Human beings, even the most important ones like Abraham, will falter. They'll be weak, fearful, they'll make mistakes. But the divine promise holds firm. It transcends human inadequacy.
That's a really powerful synthesis. Looking at it that way, you see how these chapters establish identity not through human perfection, because that's clearly lacking,
Definitely lacking.
but through God's action, God's promise, God's unwavering commitment, even when humans mess up.
That seems to be the bedrock message coming through these stories.
It really changes how you might read the rest of Genesis and maybe the whole Bible.
It provides a crucial lens, I think.
It does, and it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? If Abraham's defining moment of courage in that whole Sodom saga wasn't necessarily his personal righteousness, but his willingness to stand up and argue, to intercede for justice and mercy, what does that say about responsibility today? For anyone who sees themselves as part of that covenant tradition or even just inherits this story, what's our obligation to argue for, to act for justice and mercy in the world?
That's the question, isn't it? A challenging thought to end on.
Definitely something to mull over.
Indeed.
Well, this has been fascinating. Thanks for walking us through this deep dive into Genesis 17 to 20.
My pleasure.
And thanks to all of you for joining us. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.